things apparently.
You guys have classes, or what happened?
Why is the enemy not doing
So well, you said you were gonna come for an hour, and then you said
What?
so when does your classes?
Is the sprite renderer
Like 8:30.
All right, we're back. We are COMP305 in the fall 2019 semester at Centennial, and we're week 5, part 2 of our broadcast. We're talking about intro to 2D platformers, player movement, and we're going to continue from the last place we left off, which was when our character was just going to fall. So, created some platforms, and we press play. You can see that the player just falls kind of down. So what we want to do is we want to move our character around, but there's a couple things we need to check first. So going back to our scripts, and I'm going to go to my player controller. So when I go there, I want to get input not just for movement, for changing my state, but also for movement. And what I want to do here is I want to use physics to impart energy to my player. So instead of my player being moved left and right, as an example, by changing position, he's going to be moved through physics. Okay, so let's go back to move right. So when I move right, what I want to do is I want to use physics 2D. And what I want to do is I want to kind of do a bit of energy, right? So it's almost like I want to push, the object, as an example, over. In order for me to do that, though, I need to use the rigid body of the player, which I don't have access to right now. So let's get a rigid body. So again, rigid body 2D. And we'll say that this is the hero rigid body. So I'm getting access to it inside code. And then down in here, when I go to the right, I want to say hero rigid body dot add force. Now again, there's a couple of options. I can add force, add torque, add force, add position, add relative force, and so on. There's also other options. If you look through, I can talk about angular drag, velocity, and so on. I can also change the rotation and the position, or change the velocity. I can actually add velocity to the hero as well. So all these things are properties. So let's go to add force. Add force. If you notice that there is a force vector that I'm going to be adding in, and you can see that the other option is I could have a force model, which is a lot different than just force. For now, all I care about is adding force in terms of a vector, so I can add force in a particular direction. I want to add it to the right, which means I can go vector 2D or vector 2 dot right. Vector 2 dot right is the direction, and then I have to add some kind of force modifier, or multiply this by some kind of force at the end. Okay, so if I go up, what I want to do is have that available to me in the editor. So public, we're going to call it force, and of course it's going to be a vector 2D. I'll be okay. So we'll call it force. So I want to make it available. And then down in here, I want to say that I want to multiply by some force, whatever that's going to be. Okay. And maybe instead of a vector 2D, we'll make it a float. How about that? Okay. So that's what this is going to do. So I'm multiplying by some kind of force, right? And again, force being an object or a float that I'm multiplying my vector to right. Vector to right is an enumeration that basically is +1 on the x-axis and 0 on the y-axis. So basically, I'm taking this, adding force in this particular direction. I want to do the same thing with the other ones. So I'm going to kind of go to left and I'm going to say instead of it being to the right, I'm going to move to the left. Instead of me being to left or right, I want to jump up, so it's going to be vector2 dot up, right, which is going to add that force. The same force all the way around. Now this can be a bit challenging. I may have to have more than one type of force, like a force left and right, and a force, jump force. So maybe I'll just put this as in, movement force. We'll kind of rename this thing, because that might be very different. Move force. And maybe another one, jump force, because that might be different, realistically. Here we go. Alright, so we've got forces. Let's hook up those connections on the character, the player. So here's the player, and then as we go towards his controller, I need a reference to the rigid body, which again, for now, I'm just going to drag and drop. I'm going to add some kind of move force. For now, I'm going to add something like 200, and some kind of jump force, which are going to be something like 800. Now when you look at this, you're like, whoa, 200 and 800, isn't that a lot? Let's see what it does. So again, here's the character, and if I press to the right, it's gone, right? So that's definitely too much. Let's go like 40. That's pretty good. It's pretty snappy. Let's go even lower. Yeah, that is like crazy jump force, like jump to the moon force. So let's just reduce that. Let's make it like something like 400 for that one. Let's check out that jump again. Yep, that's pretty crazy. About 200. See how that works. Here's the problem. If I keep holding the jump button, it's going to keep on jumping. It's almost like a thruster, right? So that's a real issue. Notice it's going to keep climbing and climbing and climbing forever. He's going to go into space right now. It's going like 3,000, 3,800, and finally it's reversing. It's finally coming down again. It's going to smash into this platform pretty fast. Let's see what happens. So he's coming down. He's picking up speed, and he's almost back down to Earth. Let's see. And now, whoa! He passed right through the platform and he's gone. Right? So why did that happen? Because there's something like he's not being grounded by anything. We shouldn't allow him, or our player in general, to move, right, if he's not grounded. So I can move this way and that way, kind of, move around. I can pick up speed to some, potential. I should also have a maximum speed. One thing that should limit me is, like, this is pretty snappy, but it looks like he's also, like, slidey. So if I'm going to move this fast, then either I got to increase my my animation state, or do something different. So yeah, let's check to see how he is grounded enough. So in order for me to check groundedness, going back to code, you got to think about this now. So when I'm grounded, then and only then should I be able to jump. I shouldn't be able to jump if I'm not grounded. So how do I check to see if that's true? First of all, let's just clean up some of this. So I've got my hero state, I've got my animator, and my sprite renderer, and my rigid body, and all this kind of stuff. These are kind of like properties that I want to have access to. So we'll call this, again, we want to kind of have a header that is going to be like object properties, right? And this one is going to be more force. or we'll say physics related. Physics related. There we go. And now let's go back to what it looks like on the player. It should realign some of this stuff, right? So physics related movement and jump force, that's pretty cool. One thing we need to also have in here is a is grounded Boolean. Now we can make it a state as well. So player could have a grounded or not grounded state. Okay? But for now let's leave it as a Boolean. It's only one thing. So we'll say that it's a public bool. We'll call it is grounded. And by default the player is not grounded. So is grounded is equal to false. There we go. By default. However, we have to check somehow to see that he's grounded. If he's going to try and jump, he needs to be grounded too. So we're going to say he can jump if and only if is grounded is true. If is grounded is false, he won't be able to jump. However, if he does get here, then we're going to say that is grounded is equal to false. Right? So as soon as he jumps, he's not grounded anymore. So you can only get one little jump off, which means that his little impulse energy is going to go away as soon as he leaves the platform. Same thing with moving. He can't move. He may be able to turn. So I may be able to change his direction, flipping right and left, and his animation. But one thing he should not be able to do, like he should be able to flip, but I shouldn't be able to actually animate, change his animation state in any way, or move unless, as an example, I'm just going to change this. So again, he's not walking yet. Shouldn't be able to do this unless we'll put this here. He's grounded. So I'm going to say that if is grounded, then he can move and animate and all that stuff. Otherwise, he can't. He just flip his position. He can just flip from left and right. And I was asked that question earlier today. Can I do that? Yeah, absolutely can. You can make sure it turns in midair, but for the most part, he's just going to stay as is. Same thing with this one. So again, instead of flipping, so I'll make sure he flips the right direction, but he should not be able to control his character in the air, at least not in my game. Maybe in your game, you want to give him, double jump, you want to do other things, but for now, we're going to make it so that he can't by default. Maybe there's going to be a power-up that's going to give him other abilities, but nothing that he's going to be able to do just off the cuff. Alright, cool. So that's his movement. So first we have to say, how do we determine if he's grounded? How do we determine that? So here's one way. We can use a collider that comes out of the character. There's different kinds of colliders that we have, right? We can use physics colliders to do it. One of the ways to do it is a standard collider. We can make an extra collider on the character that's physically on him, so some kind of like box collider that goes down. But the challenge with that is it's computationally expensive to have like a bunch of colliders on the character, right? We want to try and reduce that to have as little as possible, especially if you're checking for collisions every single frame with every collider, right? And if the collider is if the collider has a non, kind of shape that is not a polygon or something like that, let's say if it's something else, it could be even more computationally expensive. So one of the ways we can do that is to check to see if we have a physics collision. So we can use something called a line cast. And I was doing this earlier. It took me a bit of time to figure this out, but here's how it goes. I can set up something called a raycast hit. So raycast 2D. I will call it a hit. And we're going to use physics 2D line cast. So line cast, what it is basically it draws a line, and there's two parts to it. One of them is the start of the line, and the other part is the end of the line. And wherever that line starts and ends, right, it will generate a, and also there's something else we can use called a layer mask. And what the layer mask will do is it'll say, okay, the only thing we care about intersecting with the line is something other than, or everything else but the ground. If I'm not hitting the ground with this line, then you know what? I'm not grounded. That's what it's going to be, right? So how will this work? So again, I'm going to use my transform.position for the first part. That's the start of my, I'm just going to put it on 2 lines here. The start of my line cast is the transform.position. The second part is going to be a, you know, kind of a ground position. Right, so that's where it's going to, it's almost like an end for, I got to draw a line from one point to another. So up in the top here, I'm going to make a transform. So transform. And it's going to be public. And I'm going to basically call this the, you know, the ground target. Ground target. So the ground target is going to have a position. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this in as the end. So ground target dot position. So that's where it's going to be. I also want it to avoid, you know, anything but the layer that I'm looking for. And it's kind of looks weird, right? So I did it earlier, and I don't want to make mistakes. But if I go to Centennial, there is a example of it here. Hold on a second. There's an example of it here. And inside my assets, I'm going to explain what this thing does in a second. So under my, I call it the hero controller in the first iteration. Basically what you're going to have is something that looks like this. So I'm going to do a physics 2D line cast. I got my transform position and my ground target position. And then I got this funky line here. So what it does is it says, okay, I want layer mask, and I want to check to see that the name to layer ground, right, is the one that I want. And we're using a bitwise operation to take care of that. I'm just going to copy this code for a second. I'm going to go back here and push it in so you can see what it looks like. So it looks like this. So what this is basically saying is, look, let's compare the ground as an example. If the ground is indeed the thing that we're hitting, right, then make this a Boolean true. If the ground is not the thing that we're hitting, make this Boolean false. So, but first we have to have in our Unity project that these things all have to have a layer of ground. And again, we don't have a layer that's ground. There's layers and there's tags. We've talked about tags last week, or the last few weeks, but layers are something different. So let's add a layer. We'll call it the ground layer. So here. And what we want to do is with all this stuff, we want to tag this as ground. So all of this is ground now. Now that all of this is ground, right, and again, we can also tag it as ground, or we can actually tag it as individual things, but for now we could leave it the same. So if this is true, if it hits the ground, then this hit will be positive, a true result. If that's true, again, what I want to do is I want to say that instead of raycast hit, we'll make this a bool, because we can do that as well. And we can say that is grounded is equal to hit. But if I'm going to go there, is grounded is equal to hit, I might as well go outside of the you know, kind of box here and just say is grounded is equal to this, because it is already a bool. So the only way that I'm grounded is if I check every frame to see that I'm line casting, and if my line that goes from my character to the ground is hitting the ground, I'm good to go. One thing to note though is, first of all, I need some kind of ground target position, another game object, or some vector2 object. So, in my player, the way I want to handle it is like this. I want to, in my hierarchy, I want to right click and I want to add a empty object. So I want to add a new empty object. There it is. And I want to call this ground target. Okay. And let me just bring this back to here so we can see what this looks like. In fact, let me just put these back up here on the top. Yeah, so what this looks like for him, let me just bring back gizmos for a second, is that on this object here, I'm going to have this other object, which is the ground target. The ground target starts at the same position as the player, but I don't want that. I want the ground target to actually be a spawn point, which is just at the player's feet. But here's the problem with this, that the transformed up position is also going to be, you know, kind of thing. When I flip around and I look this way, it's also going to be in front of the player's feet. So I'm going to kind of be careful and strategic and just kind of go to the left of this. So kind of draw a little bit to the left, like over right here. Yeah, so player's feet. Now this is one way of doing it. I'm going to show you the other way in a bit. So again, I want to go just below the player's feet because I want to be able to kind of, when he's colliding or when he's, you know, kind of into the ground here, I measure that he's grounded. Okay, so again, there's two parts. There's the player and there's this ground target. You can't see the ground target. It's just a position that I'm using an empty for. Here it is. And in the player itself, what I want is that the ground target itself is going to be something that I track. Okay, great. Let's see if this works. So again, I am grounded. See how that hit the ground? Now if I press space, you can see for a brief moment, I'm not grounded anymore. But I can't really do much. It seems that my, you know, velocity, as I'm just hitting the space bar here, it's not that great. It's not long enough, you know, for me to get off the ground. It's almost like I don't impart enough force. At times, sometimes I can get it off, but most of the time, you know, I can't do it. It's not much of jumping, right? And this is because of the gravity that I put on the player. So if I go back to the player again, you can see that under the Rigidbody 2D, right, my gravity is 4. If I change this to 1 just for this test, right, and now I press the space bar, you can see that he certainly does climb up quite a bit. He runs and then boom, he's like, you know, he's almost like floating in space, right? So that's why I've left it to 4. I want a good snappy gravity. Well, what I need is more force. So again, going back up to the player, here's my player controller. This jump force, remember it was like 800 before? Well, there's a reason for that. Let's put it back. And let's see what that does. Let's see if 800 is enough. So again, 800, I got a bit of force now. Sometimes too much force. If I hold down the space bar or just hit it just enough when it jumps, I can probably get a bit of a jump force going on, right? And is 800 enough? So I'm running and then I'm jumping and not quite, right? I kind of fall down still. So 800 force may not be enough. Let's go for 900. But the good thing is I can't jump forever. I can't just keep jumping like this and then you never come back down, right? The other thing is that I have a bit of there we go. I have a bit of physics material that's been put on the player. Remember that my physics material, if I go down here, it's got a bounciness of 0.2. Let's put that to 0. I got a friction of 1, right? The other thing I can also do is I can also have friction. So this is on the player. The player himself has friction on his feet, let's say, right? But I can also add friction and other kinds of things to the other objects. So actually increase the amount of friction I have on both objects. So if I want to make it the exact same, I can use the same physics material on both. And I can call this the default physics material. Default physics material. So if I did that, I mean, I can go back to these objects, because these objects all have colliders. So I can go to these objects. Notice I have a physics material and drag and drop this one in there too. And what this would do in general is slow me down a hell of a lot. Take a look at that. If I did that with both objects and my character having physics materials, then what it would do is it would definitely stop me from moving. Bouncing would be good, but I'm not running too fast. So if I had it on both objects, then what I need to do is go back to the default physics material and change the friction to like 0.5, which should equate to a little bit of a better run. If I go higher than 0.5, then it'll be like something like that we had before. So let's go to, let's say, 0.6. That's like 1.2 equivalent, because I'm adding both those frictions together, right? So again, a little bit better, and you can see now that I can slide in, I can slide, I can move, I can jump, and I can also fall, right? Which is kind of cool. Alright, so movement. One thing that we should also test is movement with a controller, because we've tested with a keyboard, and keyboard is okay. And let's see if I have a little controller. I may not have this with me today, and that's totally fine. But it'd be nice if I had a little controller with me. Sometimes I do. Although I may not have batteries. Let's see if I have any batteries. Of course I don't. And we got loud people in the hallway. That's normal. God forbid there should be any quiet. But let me just go back to here. I do have some batteries. Let's see if I can get this going. Let's see if it's possible. I'm not sure. Okay. Except that the batteries seem to be dead. Which is always bad. Anyone have AA batteries that I can borrow? One. That's not going to do any good. Huh? Hold on a second. Okay, wait, no, I got it. I'm good. Okay, so here I've got my little trusty Xbox controller, and let's see how it works with that. Now this is a totally different experience, because you can see that as I'm moving my character right and left, I got my jumping is on the Y button, right? And it's totally different than which is on the thing. Now I personally don't like Y as a button. I like A myself, but everyone's different. I don't know, what do you guys prefer, Y or A? So again, it's like, there it is. So it's not bad. It's not terribly bad. It's got pretty good feel to it, as it is right now. And as you can see, as I jump, everything's good. Sometimes I get this happening though, like where I'm like right off the screen, kind of thing, right? And you can see where I'm at. If I'm, I'm at a point where I'm hung somewhere. So I don't know where I am. And if I want to double click, I can find my player. So go back to the screen, double click, and you can see where I'm at, right? I'm way off screen over here. Kind of landed over here on this side, right? So, I mean, I haven't bounded my character, and the other thing that I haven't done with my character is I haven't kind of I don't move my camera along with my character. So there is no camera follow that I'm doing right now. Okay, so let's try this again. So again, using a controller instead of keyboard and mouse. So here we go. And again, I'm pressing jump to jump. So this is pretty good. So jump. And if I fall, I fall. And I need to have, so a couple of things I need. I need a Deathplane. Right? I need a Deathplane. And I need a place where I need to be able to have my camera move with my character. So one of the things that that we have in place is something called standard assets, right? That you well know. But the great thing is that Unity gives us a bunch of standard assets in our install. So if I go back to my C drive, there it is. And if I go to my, program files, Unity, then inside the editor, a lot of times what we have is some kind of resources or tools. And I'm wondering if it's where it is. I want to make sure that it's in the right place. Is it on Hub? Yeah. Sometimes they have additional data. Net standard, playback engines, plugin API, resources, tools. And I wonder if they have our standard assets. So they used to have it inside the install, but there might be net standard. No. Let me just see this for a second as we go through this, 'cause I want to make sure. Otherwise, what I need to do is, if I want to get standard assets, I could. But one of the reasons why I want to look for this is because, for the most part, what you get from the standard assets is a set of tools for cameras, right? So I may just want to go up on standard assets and download it. Let's do it. So under the asset store, again, I want to go for standard assets. Standard assets. I know they had them somewhere before, but maybe they've removed them now. Alright, so Unity standard assets. That's cool. And it says I want to download them, right? And this is as of 5 and later. So we should be able to use them. Now, standard assets comes with a bunch of stuff, but I don't need all of them. And this is a pretty big download, actually. What I do need, I don't need a character controller or anything like that. But what I need instead is there's a camera follow script that actually is pretty cool that I can use. So again, I can import this. And I don't need all of them. You can be selective as to what you need. It's funny, I remember the assets were kind of standard inside of our installs. At one point they were part of the package all the time, but now. Alright, so we don't need models. I don't need a nav mesh, which is kind of cool. There are some prefabs. There's the camera switch UI, and there's a pillar, a bunch of scenes. Just make sure that I'm not getting stuff that I don't need. Standard assets, robot boy, I'm not going to use. Different kinds of standard assets. There's textures, there's scenes. Just give me 1 sec. I want to make sure I get only the ones I need, because this can be quite fat with a bunch of stuff. Okay, cool. So let me take a look at our models. Camera switch, particle scene control, slow button, place target with mouse. That's interesting. And this under sample scenes. What about standard assets? What do I got here? So I've got animations, physics materials, bouncy box stuff, which is pretty cool. Character robot boy, platform. Again, I just want to make sure that I get the right stuff. Cameras. So a free look camera, handheld camera, a CCTV camera, and there is a, here we go, abstract target follow. That's what I really want right there. Alright, so that cameras I definitely want. Cross-platform input I'll take. I don't need it, but I'll take them. I don't need characters. I got a bunch of 2D assets. I'll take those 2D assets for now, because why not? And different cross-platform input manager for inputs and button handlers, action touch buttons, joysticks, mobile control rig. Sure, okay, it's a little extra stuff that I don't really need. The editor changes I'll definitely take. Effects. Sure, I'll take some effects. Environment, I don't need speed tree stuff or terrain assets or water assets. So that stuff I don't need. Fonts I'll take. So environment, no. Fonts, yes. Particle systems I don't need. Physics materials, I got that from the 2D side, so I don't need those. Prototyping, definitely not. And utility, sometimes you get some really cool stuff that's in here. Camera controlled Bob, no, I don't need that. I don't need utilities either. Or vehicles. Okay, so not a lot. Just need these things here, so I get a bit more in there, and definitely no sample scenes. Okay, import. So again, whenever I import stuff like standard assets, it definitely fattens your project a little bit, and I don't want to use too many of these things because it adds a lot. And as soon as this is done, what I'm going to show you what I'm going to do, I'm going to make another folder called imported assets. I'm going to put all this stuff into imported assets. You're going to see what I do, so I can bury it a little bit. Alright, so here's standard assets. I'm going to make a new folder. Let's create a new folder. I'm going to call this imported assets. And just for standard assets and anything else I download, I'm going to put it inside imported assets because I don't want to see it on the root. There we go. So what I want is under cameras, there are some scripts. There's a free look camera, there's an auto cam, but there's also this abstract target follow. And if I was to actually look at what this you can see with it, is it's part of Unity assets, standard assets, and it has an enumeration. This is kind of neat, called the update type. You can choose where you want to put it, right? But what this is going to do is you attach this. So here's my fixed update. And I can kind of target the player with this script. And what it will do is it will change the transform of the target, change the camera to the transform of the target. So okay, almost like a follow target kind of thing. Let's see if this works. So again, it says abstract target follow. That's what it is. It's not. It's an abstract class. That's what it is. And what I wanted to do is I want to be able to use something like this. So target look at target uses abstract target follower. That's what it does. And what the look at target camera does, it moves the target camera to wherever I'm looking. Okay, so that's what look at target does, right? So let's take a look at this one. Maybe I can use this one to make it work. Again, I'm going to go to my camera. Here's my camera. I'm going to try and drag and drop my look at target on the camera. So there's a script I'm putting on the camera. And it says, please fix compile errors before creating new script components. Sure. What compile errors do I have? This is where I have to be very careful when I add new stuff in. Particle reflection, planar reflection. This is where I get, crazy with some Unity's assets. And this is under Unity Assets Water Planar Reflection Editor. And I don't really care about this stuff because Unity Assets Standards Water I never kind of added in. So let's make sure that I take care of those things, because the last thing I want is to have scripts that don't work. So where is this stuff? It says editor, water, a bunch of water stuff in the editor. Let's go back and take those out. Sorry guys, that's what happens when you download assets. Especially when you don't download everything, which I'm not doing. Water, cross-platform. Okay, I can probably get rid of this whole folder. Let's just delete it. Delete. Alright, how about now? Press the build target group 20 doesn't exist. define symbols. Okay, let's do that one more time where we re-import stuff in and good. Alright, cool. So now that I have that, let us try and put it on the main camera. So again, going back to imported assets, cameras, I'm going to go to scripts and I'm going to take this look at target kind of script. I'm going to take the look at target script and attach it to the camera. And what this does is says, okay, what's the target? What target am I looking at? Well, I want to look at the player. So here's my player. And it can look at fixed update or whatever. Follow speed is 1. And let's see what this does if it totally messes me up. So play. Right, and we should be able to move the camera. I have to make my own. I may have to make my own, guys. Alright, well, nice try. Look at target, supposed to work. Follow speed is 1, and rotation range, and that's not going to work. Okay. I'm okay with removing it. I was hoping to get a quick thing. There's actually a really cool follow cam, and I guess in the new versions of the standard assets they're there, but not in the other stuff. 2D character animator, sprite, and bouncy box. That actually quite sucks. Well, there is a camera script here for camera 2 follow. Camera 2D follow. Okay. Is that an abstract class or is it a regular class? Camera follow. Camera 2D follow. Let me try this one. So, camera 2D follow. Put that across to this part. Alright, let's try this again. Target transform is the player. And damping is 1. Look ahead factor 3. This is better. Okay, let's try and see if that works. Yes, this is what I was looking for. Let's take a look at this guy. So I can move around, and you can see that the camera follows the player, and it's much better than much more, a little bit more alive than everything else, huh? What do you think? A little better. So you see that moves with the player, right? And again, I can damp it more. My damping is 1. I can increase damping. Let's try it so that I maximize the screen and see what that looks like. So again, this is my scene, but my game isn't maximized. I'll maximize on play this time around, and let's see what happens. Alright, so there we go. So I kind of move to the right, move to the left, and you can see that it kind of follows the player a little nicer now than before. Now, if it's a little bit too flowy or too bouncy for you guys, that's totally cool. We can change that, but, you know, if it falls, you can see that the player falls down. So that player camera is done. Now what I need to do is, for the most part, we can add additional controls, and again, I can control it with my controller as opposed to my keyboard and mouse. Okay, one thing I need is a Deathplane, and one thing this is all set up again for next week, still. So on the bottom, we see that there is a couple of platforms, but outside of the camera, so here's my main camera. Turning gizmos on. So here's the camera, right? Outside of this thing, right, what we're seeing is this situation, right? And what I want to do with this is I want to see what it would look like. Make sure that shade is on. There we go. I want to make sure that there's a Deathplane underneath here. Now, it depends on how far you're going to fall. But typically what we want to do is we want the Deathplane to be invisible. So, character falls, hits the Deathplane, gets respawned back in the checkpoint, whatever that is, right? So again, we can use an empty object. First, before I do that, I want to add to my overrides the camera script that I added to the player, right? So now the player has that camera script. And what I want to do is down in here, I want to add a new object. So again, I want a new, well, for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a 3D cube. Let's go and do that. Let's do that again. I want to add a 2D object, right? And I want to add it, I want to have a box happen. So simple object, simple sprite. There is no sprite for it, so I'm just going to select the sprite. Let's see, something that is pretty hardy, like, sure, something like this. Doesn't matter, because what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to expand this thing just to give myself a shape. So it's going to be something like this. And it's going to hit somewhere down in here. So something like that. And we're going to make this bigger for now. What I don't care about is the sprite renderer. So the sprite renderer doesn't have to be there. But what I do care about is some kind of box collider. So I'm going to get a box collider in there. And the box collider is the size of the object. And what I can do is I can kill the sprite renderer. I don't even need this object and remove it. Now I can see I have a sprite collider. So the box renderer was just there to help me position everything. Now it's good, right? I can change this new sprite to, we'll call it the Deathplane, right? So when the player collides with the Deathplane, then he respawns somewhere else. And we need to have some kind of checkpoint or respawn point or whatever. One thing we could do is we can have a series of respawn points. So as the character moves through the map, then he can respawn back at the last checkpoint. Okay, whatever that checkpoint is. So for now, we're going to make him respawn back where he is. I can create a checkpoint, which is just going to be up here. So again, here's my Deathplane. Let's make a new empty object, which we're going to move where he is right now, approximately. And we'll call this checkpoint 1. It's just going to have some kind of coordinates, all right? So there's checkpoint 1. So the player is going to fall in the Deathplane, collide with it, and then is going to respawn on checkpoint 1. Here's the Deathplane. All right, so question for you. Where should the collider be? Should the collider be on the Deathplane, or should the collider be on the player? In this case, Deathplane's okay, right? Because the Deathplane can kind of span the entire game if you really want to. And also, what I can also check is which is the active checkpoint. Right now, the active checkpoint is right here, right? So if the character falls into the Deathplane, then he's going to go spawn back at this active checkpoint, right? The only way I can tell which one is the active checkpoint is if I have some kind of trigger that when I pass by a certain part of the level, then the active checkpoint changes to the new active checkpoint, whatever that is. So I need a couple things. I need something called active checkpoint on here, on this thing, on the ground plane. So let's add a new script. So new script, create new C# script. We're going to call this Deathplane controller. And the Deathplane controller is basically going to be attached to the Deathplane. It's going to have something called the active checkpoint. So we fed the active checkpoint. I'm also going to make this thing system serializable. So I want to be able to access it from other places. And we're going to put a new thing called, and it's going to be a public game object that I want to have called active checkpoint, whatever that active checkpoint is. I also want to have a reference to the player, so my player object, so public game object player. So my player falls down, collides with it, it's going to go back to the active checkpoint. The rest of the stuff that falls onto it can stay there. I don't care. But my player, that's got to be on the active checkpoint. Alright, so there's going to be a public on collision enter 2D. Here's my collision 2D with other, and I can say that, did I do something wrong? On collision, oh boy, yeah, on collision enter 2D when something collides with it, if other dot game object dot tag is equal to player, then what I want to do is the other dot game object dot transform dot position is going to be equal to the active checkpoint dot transform dot position. In fact, you know what? If the active checkpoint's just a position, I don't care for it to be a game object, but actually just a transform. That might be better, because it'll save us doing all this. Active checkpoint dot position. See what I say, because it is a transform after all. There. So it's going to reposition itself when if it collides with the player, it's going to position itself at the Deathplane when on collision enter. Okay. Now I need references to these two things. Right now I don't need update and start. However, I may. So right now I'm just going to comment them out. And again, questions I get are things like, do I really have to remove update and start? And the answer is, if you have an empty update and start in your code, it actually is computationally expensive because it checks every object that has update and start, especially update. So both are pretty bad. At the very least, comment them out. You can always put them back in or code them back in. For that, you know, most likely you can get away with not even using them at all. So, all right, cool. So I got this done. And what I want to do is I want to go to the Deathplane. There it is. And I'm going to drag and drop my new Deathplane controller on there, which adds these two things, the active checkpoint and the player. The active checkpoint, I know right now it's going to be checkpoint 1 for now, and the player is going to be something I put there too. There. Let's test it, see if it works. So again, I fall off the thing, and that didn't work. So let's check and see what happens. Again, when you have this situation and it's not stopping, what you can do is unmaximize. You can go back to the scene and see where the player is. Right, so here's the player. So what happened? That's the question. What happened? Where did the player go? And how come he passed through? Did he pass through the Deathplane? Did he hit it? What happened? Because he should like land on the Deathplane and not die, right? He just respawns. So what happens here? Let's check the Deathplane out. There it is. Let's put that. Again, I don't have a sprite on there, but let's put it back. So let's add a component. So I want to add a sprite renderer, and we'll move the sprite renderer up. So move it up back to where it was. Another sprite render, let's just choose a sprite we want to use. Heck, we could use whatever we want, but let's just use something that is decent. Let's use that. There we go. So at least we can see it, or even, you know, something that looks like, you know, a button or something, but that's fine too. So we can see it now. Okay. I've taken out the game, so game is not maximized on play anymore. And what I want to do is I want to see what happens when the character falls. So does he pass through it? What happens? I mean, this is my box collider, so my box collider spans the whole way, right? So that should work. And I do have a my Deathplane controller checked to see if there's a collision, but let's see what's going on. I have a rigid body on the character, so he shouldn't go through the plane, but my object itself does not. Alright, so let's just do one of these. And if I let go of this, and push my player to the left. I can see that he's going to go through the plane, and let's see what happens. He went right through. You see that because he just dropped right through the plane. So a couple things happened. One, he didn't collide. I don't know why. I mean, he didn't stop. I mean, he should at least stop because we're using basic physics here, right? So that's like, there's nothing really that's crazy about this thing. It's not outside of our area. It's in the same order and layer. I have a box collider. I mean, really, it's not even traveling that fast, so he shouldn't be able to tunnel through this thing. So I'm not sure why that's happening. So let's just do a couple things. Let's get rid of it. And there's a quicker way of doing this. I'm going to take one of these blocks, because I know these are okay, and I'm going to copy paste. So I'm going to basically duplicate. And then I'm going to just take this block and put it in where the Deathplane should be, which is somewhere down here. And we can expand it like normal. There we go. And let's see what happens then when I let go. So, does he fall? He does, and that's what I was expecting to happen. Right? So it looks like for whatever reason that other one not working. Okay. Alright, so let's just get rid of this. So it's at y is -10 or -11, something like that. That's fine. We'll just get rid of it. Get rid of the Deathplane. We'll do exactly what we just did. We'll make a copy of this one. So duplicate and bring it down. Say -11, and we'll expand it. We'll rename it something else. There we go. Make it really big, and we'll rename this thing to Deathplane. Here it is. We'll take off the sprite renderer, so we won't render anything. And what we will do is we'll add a script, like we said before, which is my Deathplane controller, which should do everything that I need to do. Here's my checkpoint, and here's my player. Let's try it again. So again, I'm running it, and I fall onto the Deathplane, and reset. There we go. Perfect. That's what I wanted. So now I can jump, and if I fall into the Deathplane, then I reset back to where I was. Just jump. Now this is kind of a problem. Sometimes I get to this thing where the player, for whatever reason, right, doesn't quite make it. Here's another possibility. What happens if I'm here? This is really bad. So why is this happening? Because remember, I have a little line cast that goes down, and the line cast is happening just outside of my range, so it's happening like right here, right? But meanwhile, the collider, just to get to my player for a second, the collider for the player. So just to show you what's happening here, is right here. Okay, so here's the collider, and if you look, the player also has a ground target, and the ground target's right there. So because the ground is right there, the collider isn't quite good enough to make the player fall. He's just on the edge because this collider is a box collider, and the player's collider is a capsule that looks like this. So he's going to fall. Now if I wanted to change this to see what it looks like, I can modify the player's collider so that it's pretty steep. As an example, right? That could happen. But then we get in some other problems later on. I think this is a little bit, my camera's a little bit too much. Oh, there we go. But still I got this problem. See this problem? Can't jump. Only I can do is turn. So this is where, to me, this is where the idea of a ray that's casting downwards for my player may not be good enough. Okay, so I'm just talking about this from a gameplay perspective, right? Alright. So what can we do differently? Going back to the drawing board with my, it's all about gameplay. Like for this, a couple things. I definitely want to dampen the camera. I found during testing that the camera, this whole follow camera thing, as an example, was a little bit too bouncy for me, right? So looking ahead return is okay. The look ahead factor kind of thing, that's okay, but the damping should be even more. Like it should be even heavier damping in terms of how it kind of comes in. And so let's check that first. What happens with more like heavier damping? Like that might be a little better. I like that. It's not as floaty, you know, kind of thing as the other one. It takes a little bit more time, and we still get stuck. But at least the damping is working a little better at a damping value of 2. If I move the damping value to 3, right, just to show you this, and if I change this guy's position just so that we can make him work again. Okay, so going back to the game, again, this is all testing, right? So here's damping value of 3. So it's much slower. See that? So it follows, but it's not following as fast. You know, in fact, you know, the damping value might be even a hindrance. So I think 2 is perfect. 1.5, 2, something like that. But I think anything like the way it was before for the camera, it was just a little bit too fast. So damping value of 2 looks pretty good. I'm more comfortable with this for sure. But what about this problem with my player? My player's got a terrible problem. So let's go back and talk about under scripts, let's go to player controller. So this is grounded stuff, right? There's other things we can use instead of physics 2D line casts, all right? Remember what we're doing. We have 2 parts, the transform position and the ground target position. So the other one we can use to see if we're grounded is a physics 2D dot, and again, there's a box cast. Okay, there's also a circle cast, right? Which is kind of interesting because all these different kinds of casts are different than just a collider. And in some ways more effective. So there's also something called overlap circle. There's a bunch of other stuff we can do. But what I really want to use is a box cast. So here's my box cast. So again, you can see that contact filter is something we want to use. Let's take a look at the box cast to make sure that it's exactly what we want. So I'm going to go pull up. Again, I'm going to say something like Unity box cast 2D. So what this does, here's the physics 2D box cast. And again, I'm kind of zoomed in here, so you might see it weird, but see if I can zoom out, because I'm already at 150 here. There we go. So it basically tells you that this is the way it is. It says that there is a layer mask, which is what I definitely want to use. Filter to detect colliders only in certain layers, right? So I want to definitely use an origin, a size, an angle, the angle of the box in degrees, what that is, right? The direction, a vector representing the direction of the box, and so on. And we're probably going to get some example code. That's usually what they give us at the bottom. And sometimes they don't, which is like something like this, right? So I want to definitely go to the scripting API. So for boxcast. Yeah. It's not really a great thing, but we do have a layer mask in there, which is cool. I don't need a contact filter, but definitely the layer mask. And I wonder which thing we're going to use to do that. Let's make sure that it's the right thing. Box 2D, distance, contact filter. Yeah. So and then it returns a public raycast hit, which is equivalent to what we want. So I can say is grounded. Let's see if I can do this thing. Is equal to a physics 2D boxcast. And I'm going to put in the vector origin, which is again the transform dot position. The size of the boxcast, size of the vector. So this is where size, my guess. If I'm going to go back to my the size of the box. Now the size is definitely a vector 2. And I'm guessing it's width and height. That's what I'm guessing. So width and height. So let's make it kind of a width would be like 1, maybe 2. 2. So it needs to be a vector 2. 2, and I want to have a height of 1, right? And why did that give me a problem? Vector 2 size. That's why. And then we also have to have a float angle. And I'm wondering if I put 0.0 in there, what happens? And a direction, which is vector 2 dot down. And I also need a distance or a layer mask. I wonder if I can put, is it a distance first then a layer mask? Do I always have to have a distance? Yes, distance and layer mask. Yep. It's always that way. So distance and layer mask. So let's say a distance of 1 and a layer mask of the following. So let's try that. Okay, took it, but we don't know if these are all correct. Let me just comment this part out, and then we'll just do the regular things. We'll comment this out so we have it. We may also want to do a regular collider after, but this is usually better and more performant, typically. Let's try this out. Alright, so player, are you grounded? I am, he says. He says he is. Let's see if I'm grounded now. I'm not. Ooh, this looks much better. Much, much better. Look at that. Alright, let's see how this works. And maybe I've solved my problem. Maybe not. So if I kind of go to the edge, I'm not grounded. How about if I go up here? Whoa. That was weird. If I go to the edge, cool. Much better. So the box cast looks like it's way better than the cast, but now I get some weird ass effects happening. Sorry to say it that way, but there is. Box cast does something different than line cast, in that I'm grounded for a much longer time frame, which means that my jump force doesn't have to be as great. So that's better, actually. So let's change my jump force to back to 400, which might be where we need it to be. Wow, even that's a lot. Let's go in game. Let's do that to 200. Alright, let's put that back. It's not bad. 200 looks like it might be okay. Maybe even less. Maybe 150. This is good. I like less power is always nicer than more, right? So let's try that out. Cool. Wow, that's much better. Not sure about the look ahead though. Whatever. Downward, my plane. So definitely, because of the line, I can definitely do things like wall jumping now. Yeah, cool. That's what I wanted, right? That's exactly what I wanted. So wall jumping works, right? Which is kind of cool because I'm using a box cast, which is kind of cool. Now, what do you guys think about the camera? Do you think the camera should be more quicker? Do you think the camera should be slower? What are your thoughts? It's kind of floaty. What are your thoughts on this? To make it more snappy, so this is 150, let me remember that. If I go back to the camera and make it a lot snappier, so my damping, let's say, would be 0. That means wherever my character goes, so too does the camera, like one of these. And then it just like jumps. That's kind of weird, actually. Look at that. So, whoop. And it's like it kind of cuts back to the camera, right? So, cool, but it kind of is a weird cut with a look ahead. So maybe not 0. Let me go. How about if it's back to 1 again? Let's see what that does. Maybe I didn't like it because of the whole jumping factor that we had before. Yeah, you know what? This is actually pretty cool, man. Now that we have that jumping thing going on. And yeah, and I can jump off the corners, and I'm pretty good now. Thoughts, guys? What are your thoughts on this one? So pretty good jumping qualities in terms of you know, movement, right? And if I fall, I got the Deathplane, and it basically puts me back up there. All right, so that looks like it's going to go to 1. I'm going to go back to the player. Let's move this down to 150. Looks like now that's good enough. And let's go back to my script. I think that was great that I was able to do a box cast with these parameters. You don't need that anymore. And the box cast is just that much better. Cool. One thing to do tonight would be nice to see is what this box looks like. And what I can do is I can do a debug dot raycast, so draw ray. There's also draw line. And what draw line does is it draws the line in the direction that I'm going in. So I can actually see the ray or the line while I'm physically on the scene, but it's not quite what I want. Okay, cool. Couple other things that I want to do before we stop for today. One is let's add some sound for the player. So when it jumps, he's going to make that weird, annoying sound. Let's try that out. So again, first let's override the player. Let's apply it. I'm also going to take that Deathplane for now, and I want to reuse this thing. So I'm going to go back to prefabs. I'm going to drag and drop the Deathplane to the prefab so I can have that in there for now. That whole idea behind it. And I want to add a little bit of audio to the player when he jumps. So let's go back to audio, and there's a jump audio that I'm going to add in there. Let's add in audio source. It's my audio source, and I'll just drag and drop the jump in there. Alright, I do not want to play on awake, and I definitely want to lower the volume because it'll be really annoying if I do this the wrong way. Let's put that audio up a little bit. And so what I want to do now with this guy is when he jumps, I want to play the audio sound, which means I need a reference to that in the player controller. So again, going back to the player controller, which is here. Up to the top, I'm going to add in kind of the sounds I want to make. So public audio source. We'll call this the jump sound. And what I'll say is every time he jumps, she'll make that jump sound. So we'll say that jump sound dot play, which is what he's going to do. Jump sound dot play. But in order for me to play the jump sound, I need to have a reference to it. And what I'm going to do is inside the player, I'm just going to drag and drop for now. And let's play it and see if it works. So does it work? I don't hear anything, but that could be an effect of the room that we're in. You know, let's try that again. how about this thing here? So what about if it's the sound volume that we need to find? Yeah, there we go. It's annoying, but right? Ah. Okay, double jump. That was cool. Okay. So that sound works okay. Alright. And I think that's where I want to end for today. I think this is a good spot because I've got player movements. I got camera follow, which is a standard asset I got from the asset store, which makes this a little bit nicer. Next week, what I want to do is I want to get tile mapping happening so I can really make a nice level. Level design right now is pretty poor. The other thing I'd like to do is put together a little mini map, right? So how does that work? We also need a user interface for some kind of score, pickups, that kind of stuff if we can, and of course enemies, which we're very, very far away from. So the enemies, the way they're going to do it is they're going to use, again, some kind of box cast in order for them to see the player. Then they're going to change their behavior around the player. If they see the player, they're going to rush at him. So there's going to be a walking and a running kind of script. And I may have additional enemies that I kind of come at them right now. So for now, though, we have some basic movement and it looks pretty good. Just as a reminder, what's due tonight, one more time. Okay, so everyone's clear. So I want to make sure that everyone's good with this one. Yeah. So again, we're sitting at week 5. Assignment 1 is going to be due this weekend. I'm going to move it to Sunday officially. I know some people are needing more time, so second move that we're doing. We also have your first playable build that's also due this week. That's tonight at midnight. That's not moving. It's worth 5% of your grade, right? Plus your peer review. Make sure you get that done. Again, what I'm looking for is honest feedback. Be nice, all right? Because, you know, I always look at it like this. Whenever you point one finger at somebody else, you're pointing 3 fingers back at yourself, right? So I know it's kind of an old adage, but I like to use it as much as possible. And then next week, when we get together, right, we'll be handling more of assignment 2. Assignment 2, I recommend you start it earlier. You can see I've spent the entire time working on just basic movement, one little platform just to test with, and a character. That's it, right? There's nothing else I've done this time around. It's way harder to do a platformer than it is to do a side scroller. I don't have a scrolling background. I don't have parallax scrolling. I don't have background sounds. I don't have enemies. I don't have all kinds of stuff that you need for your background scroller. This is going to, or your platformer. It takes a lot more work. Physics has to be in play. There's got to be some kind of stuff that makes your, you know, your platformer exciting, I would say. And it's going to be something that some of you are going to be making as your final project. So this is an opportunity for the people who are making a platformer to kind of band together, each make their own level. This is a smart thing to do, right? And then combine some of that information together to help make your final project, right, if you're making a platformer. One thing to note also, just a reminder, that the midterm exam is hitting us week 7. That's 2 short weeks away. Next week we'll do a bit of a review as well as finishing up some more of the platformer stuff. You're going to have some kind of in-class assignment for you to complete during your midterm, like I said before, where you have free opportunity to look at the internet, look at code, your code, my code, talk to people, all that kind of stuff. It's not going to be one of those, you know, pressure exams where you can't talk to anybody, although it might be pressure, you know, because you have to finish the in-day. There are no extensions. If you don't attend the exam, you can't write it, right? And that's how it looks like for next week. Any questions before we go? All right, guys, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.